journey in your last two. I sweet med tea when they turned in. The styron down to mute. And can lend a pole that sunk he died.
When corporations pay a capital dividend, many people assume there is only one important date. But in reality, there are 3 different dates, and each serves a different legal and tax purpose. Understanding the distinction between these dates is essential because confusion can lead to mistakes about who is actually entitled to receive the dividend. Let's start with the first date, the declaration date. This is the date on which the board of directors formally approves and declares the capital dividend. Think of this as the moment the dividend is legally created. Before the declaration, there is no dividend. After the declaration, the corporation has formally committed to paying it. However, the declaration date does not necessarily determine who receives the dividend. That brings us to the second date, the shareholder of record date, often called the record date. This is one of the most important dates in the entire process. The record date is used to identify which shareholders are officially entitled to receive the dividend. The corporation looks at its share register on that date and determines who the shareholders of record are. Those shareholders become the individuals or entities that are entitled to the dividend. Finally, we have the payment date. This is simply the date on which the money is actually distributed. The corporation transfers funds, issues checks, or makes electronic payments to the shareholders who are entitled to receive the dividend. Notice something important. The payment date is not necessarily the same as the date that determines entitlement. The payment date is simply when the cash changes hands. This is why the warning on the right side of the slide is so important. These 3 dates are not the same thing. They serve completely different purposes. The declaration date creates the dividend. The record date determines who receives the dividend. And the payment date is when the dividend is actually paid. A helpful memory rule is shown at the bottom of the slide. Declaration date equals creation of the dividend. Record date equals determination of the recipient. Payment date equals delivery of the cash. Keeping these 3 dates separate in your mind is critical for both corporate law and tax planning purposes. In the next slide, we'll look at a real-world example involving a share sale between 2 shareholders and answer the practical question everyone asks. Who actually gets the capital dividend when ownership changes between the record date and the payment date? Now that we understand the 3 important dividend dates, let's answer the practical question that often arises when shares change hands. Who actually receives the capital dividend? Many people assume the answer is simple. They think the shareholder who owns the shares on the payment date receives the dividend. But in most cases, that's not how it works. Let's walk through the timeline shown on this slide. On June 1st, the corporation declares a capital dividend. At this point, the dividend has been created, but we still don't know who is entitled to receive it. Next comes June 15th, the shareholder of record date. On this date, shareholder A owns the shares. The corporation reviews its share register and identifies shareholder A as the shareholder of record. This step is extremely important because the record date is generally used to determine entitlement to the dividend. Now let's move forward to June 20th. After the record date has passed, shareholder A sells the shares to shareholder B. Ownership of the shares changes hands. At this point, many people assume that shareholder B will now receive the dividend because B owns the shares. But that's where the misunderstanding occurs. Finally, on June 30th, the payment date arrives. The corporation pays the capital dividend. So who gets the money? The answer is shareholder A. Why? Because shareholder A was the shareholder of record on June 15th. That record date established the legal entitlement to the dividend. The later sale of the shares did not automatically transfer that entitlement. Notice the confusion shown by shareholder B in the illustration. B might reasonably ask, "But I owned the shares when the cash was paid." And that's exactly why understanding these dates is so important. Ownership on the payment date does not automatically determine who receives the dividend. In most situations, the shareholder of record date controls. Think of the record date as a snapshot. The corporation freezes the shareholder list on that date and determines who is entitled to the dividend. Even if ownership changes afterward, the entitlement has already been established. This rule is particularly important in corporate reorganizations, share sales, estate planning transactions, and capital dividend planning. Whenever shares are being transferred around the same time a dividend is declared, practitioners pay very close attention to the record date. A misunderstanding can easily result in the dividend being paid to the wrong person or disputes arising between buyers and sellers. The key principle is simple. The shareholder of record on the record date is generally entitled to the capital dividend. That's why the record date is often called the dividend entitlement date. In the next slide, we'll see how tax practitioners coordinate the declaration date, record date, payment date, and Form T-2054 election to ensure the capital dividend is paid correctly and documented properly. Now that we understand the three important dividend dates and how the shareholder of record determines entitlement, let's look at how tax practitioners coordinate the entire process in practice. When a corporation plans to pay a capital dividend, there is much more involved than simply writing a check. Several legal, tax, and corporate steps must be completed in the correct order. Let's follow the workflow shown on this slide. The process begins with the board resolution. This is the declaration date. The directors formally approve and declare the capital dividend. This step is important because it legally creates the dividend. Without a valid declaration, there is no dividend to pay. Next, the corporation prepares Form T-2054. As we've discussed, this is the election that tells CRA the dividend is intended to be treated as a capital dividend. The election and supporting calculations are prepared before the dividend is paid. The next critical step is establishing the shareholder of record date. The corporation reviews its share register and determines exactly who the shareholders of record are on that date. This step answers one of the most important questions in the entire process. Who is legally entitled to receive the dividend? Once entitlement has been established, the corporation reaches the payment date. This is when the cash is actually distributed to the shareholders of record. The money may be paid by check, electronic transfer, or credited to shareholder accounts depending on the circumstances. After the payment is completed, the final step is updating the corporate records. Board resolutions, dividend schedules, shareholder records, election forms, and supporting documentation are all retained in the corporation's files. Notice the tax advisor on the right side of the slide. Before the dividend is paid, experienced practitioners often review several documents together: the board resolution, the share register, Form T-2054, and the dividend documentation. The purpose of this review is to ensure that all dates are consistent and that the dividend is being paid to the correct shareholders. The summary table at the bottom provides a useful way to remember the role of each date. The declaration date creates the dividend. The record date identifies who receives the dividend. And the payment date determines when the money is actually distributed. Each date answers a different question. Has the dividend been legally created? Who is entitled to receive it? And when will it be paid? This is why practitioners use detailed checklists when planning capital dividends. They confirm that the dividend was properly declared. They establish the record date. They identify the eligible shareholders. They prepare Form T-2054 accurately. They complete the payment. and they retain all supporting documentation. The key practitioner rule is simple. Whenever a capital dividend is being planned, always confirm who is the shareholder of record before the dividend is paid. A correct CDA calculation is important. A correct T2054 election is important. But if the corporation pays the dividend to the wrong shareholder, significant legal and administrative problems can arise. That's why successful capital dividend planning is not just about tax calculations. It's also about properly coordinating the declaration date, record date, payment date, and supporting corporate documentation.